Hello, friends. On July 20, 1969, the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the moon. Inside were astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. After landing, Armstrong tried to open the hatch to step onto the moon. Due to high internal pressure, it wasn't easy, but after a short struggle, he managed to open it. Then, wearing his heavy spacesuit, he began to climb down. The exit was narrow, and he accidentally hit the top, breaking off a small piece of the lunar module. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin noticed because there's no air on the moon, meaning no sound can travel there. But that broken piece turned out to be crucial. It was the ascent engine activation key. Without it, the lunar module wouldn't be able to take off again. In other words, returning to Earth would be impossible. Unaware of all this, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon's surface. A small step for a man, a giant leap for mankind. But did it really happen? Even after more than 50 years, many people still doubt whether humankind truly went to the moon. Some claim the Apollo 11 mission was a hoax staged by the U.S. government. They ask, how could the flag wave if there's no wind on the moon? So, what's the truth? Let's find out together. 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. A small step for a man, a giant leap for mankind. Surprisingly, the real reason behind the Apollo 11 mission was a war. More precisely, the Cold War and the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. It shocked the American government. A few months later, the U.S. launched its own satellite. But 3 years later, in 1961, the Soviets shocked the world again. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. Once again, the Soviets had beaten the Americans. President John F. Kennedy was determined to change that. On April 20, 1961, he wrote to the vice president, "How can we beat the Soviets? By orbiting a laboratory? By flying around the moon? Are we really putting in maximum effort? Are we working 24 hours a day?" A few days later, he found the answer. The next great step was to send humans to the moon. And on May 25, 1961, Kennedy made his famous speech. "Before this decade is out, we will land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth." That was an incredible promise for its time. There were no smartphones, no internet, no GPS. Computers were slow and primitive. Yet, Kennedy promised a moon landing within the decade. Over the next 5 years, between $7 and $9 billion were allocated to this goal. Thousands of scientists at NASA focused on just one mission, reaching the moon. Testing began soon after. First the rockets, then the command module's heat shield and the service module's propulsion system. Between 1963 and 1967, dozens of unmanned tests were conducted. In February 1967, the first crewed test was planned, Apollo 1. But on January 27, 1967, during a ground test, a fire broke out inside the capsule, killing 3 astronauts. Despite the tragedy, NASA pressed on. Apollo 4, 5, and 6 were launched without crews. In October 1968, Apollo 7 successfully carried humans into orbit. 2 months later, Apollo 8 orbited the moon. March 1969, Apollo 9 tested the lunar module. May 1969, Apollo 10 was a full dress rehearsal, just short of landing. Then finally, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Apollo 11 has lifted off. The crew consisted of Neil Armstrong, commander, 38 years old. Michael Collins, command module pilot. Buzz Aldrin, lunar module pilot. The spacecraft had 3 parts: the command module, service module, and lunar module. The first 2 together were called the CSM, command and service module. The lunar module was named Eagle, and the CSM was called Columbia. Michael Collins remained in orbit aboard Columbia, while Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon in Eagle. The Saturn V rocket, loaded with 1 million gallons of fuel, lifted the spacecraft into Earth orbit within 10 minutes. After several loops, it set course for the moon. The journey took 4 days. On July 19, they entered lunar orbit. Then the modules separated. Collins stayed behind, while Armstrong and Aldrin began their descent. During landing, two alarms sounded, 1201 and 1202. The astronauts didn't know what they meant. Mission Control said, "Go." Later, it was revealed that the computer was overloaded, but still running the vital programs. Armstrong switched to manual control to avoid landing on rocks. With just 5% fuel left and Mission Control counting down 60 seconds, 30 seconds, Armstrong calmly said, "Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." The Eagle had touched down safely. Armstrong stepped out, watched live by 650 million people. Then Aldrin followed. For 2.5 hours, they collected lunar soil and rock samples and set up scientific instruments. A solar wind detector, a laser reflector to measure Earth-Moon distance, a seismometer to detect moonquakes. They collected 23 kilograms of rocks and dust and left a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon." But on their way back, they noticed something alarming. The ascent engine key was broken. Without it, they would be stranded on the moon. Buzz Aldrin came up with a brilliant fix. He used a felt-tip pen to complete the circuit, and it worked. The engine fired and the Eagle reconnected with Columbia. During the trip home, the service module's thrusters failed briefly, scattering debris dangerously close to the capsule, but miraculously, they were unharmed. The mission was so risky that President Richard Nixon had even prepared a speech in case the astronauts died. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon in peace shall stay on the moon to rest in peace. Thankfully, that speech was never needed. The capsule splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. All 3 astronauts were alive and rescued. However, they were kept in quarantine for 2 weeks in case they had brought back lunar microbes. They hadn't. Apollo 11 became a global sensation. Kennedy's promise had been fulfilled. The United States had won the space race. But not everyone was convinced. Some found the timing, exactly before the decade ended, too perfect. Had it really happened? Or was it a Hollywood-style hoax to defeat the Soviets in image only? These conspiracy theories were debunked many times. If the US had faked it, the Soviet Union would have exposed it instantly. Yet even Soviet scientists acknowledged the Apollo 11 mission as real. The Great Soviet Encyclopedia listed it among humanity's top 3 space achievements. The launch of Sputnik, 1957. Yuri Gagarin's flight, 1961. Apollo 11's moon landing, 1969. So why was the flag waving? It wasn't. The flag had a horizontal rod on top to hold it upright in the windless environment. Because the rod didn't fully extend, it looked wrinkled and waving. The motion came from the astronauts moving the pole during setup. Why were there no stars in the photos? Because the landing happened in daylight. The sun's glare made the cameras too bright to capture the faint light of stars, just like when you use flash at night and can't see stars in your photos. Why did shadows point in different directions? Because the moon's surface reflects light. There wasn't just one light source, but multiple reflections. And Buzz Aldrin's visor showed Armstrong's reflection, but no camera? That's because the camera was mounted on Armstrong's chest. The iconic moon footage was recorded by a camera mounted on the Lunar Module itself. Critics at the time still questioned the cost. The New York Times wrote in 1962, "With the money spent on space, 120 Harvards could have been built." While America struggled with poverty, inequality, and the Vietnam War, billions were spent on reaching the moon. Yet, the Apollo program sparked unexpected revolutions, especially in microchip technology. NASA's demand for thousands of chips caused their prices to drop by over 90%, making the computer age possible. Just 3 years later, in December 1972, the last moon mission, Apollo 17, took place. No human has set foot on the moon since. The reason? Cost. Over 400,000 people worked on the program. Its total price tag was $24 billion, more than $100 billion today. By the 1970s, public interest and funding faded. Vietnam, inflation, and protest took center stage. NASA's budget was cut and the later Apollo missions were canceled. In 2017, President Donald Trump vowed to send humans back to the moon. For the first time since 1972, we are returning to the moon, this time to stay. Later, he shifted the goal toward Mars. Now,